Hi, my name is Joseph Kirby, More Homes Halifax, and today I am here to discuss the Housing Accelerator Fund and the public hearing that was had with the Halifax Council on May the 21st and May the 22nd. This video is going to be highlighting the people who supported this and their perspectives. There were quite a lot of them, and I think their voices need to be amplified. For those who are not familiar, what the Housing Accelerator Fund is it's a fund, conditional fund, being given to the city of Halifax and many cities across the country with certain conditions. The federal government will give money to the city if they enable 4 units per lot as of right development where services exist in the municipality, if they increase density and height in ER3, corridor zones, and HR zones, and near transit corridors, if they increase density in residential areas with a focus on encouraging wood frame construction, if they increase height and floor area ratios in center zones and in the regional center, if they increase density near university and college campuses, remove more mandatory parking minimums, increase as of right development approvals, protect heritage and consider water and wastewater infrastructure in doing so, and work with the province to enable unilateral discharge of DAs. This is the goal of it, and this is what I and many other people supported. Here is what they had to say.
I think the housing shortage is the most important issue facing the city, and I think this is a really good step. I think at the end of the day, we have a choice about priorities. And on the one end, people are asking for more housing, and on the other end, people are trying to protect shade, privacy, community character. Which one matters more? We have a very deep housing shortage, 20,000 plus units and counting. We're about to get data tomorrow on Halifax's population growth in 2023, and we've been struggling to build more than 5,000 units. That doesn't work. Now, the city is very keen to say how small of a budget it has, and it's very true. But you have huge authority over land use, and land use really matters. Everybody here clearly thinks it really matters, right? There are a lot of people here whose deepest fear is that this plan might work. But just to ease some people's concerns, I think it'd be useful to talk about what success looks like. We have about 120,000 single-family homes in HRM. If 1% of those get changed into a multiplex, we will add about 3,000 to 5,000 units to our housing stock per year. That effectively almost doubles the amount of housing construction that we have. And that also means 10 years from now, when you step outside, 90% of the homes that you see today will still be there. Across most of the city, we mostly have residential low-rise zoning. But even in our urban core, in the regional center, half of the land area is ER1 or ER2 zoning. The parts of the city that people love the most don't follow these rules at all. The house I rent goes right up to the curb. It uses more than half the lot. It touches another home. It's a great place to live.
First, there's the claim that increasing density will make traffic worse. When students are denied the opportunity to live near their school, they're pushed further out of town to areas where busing and walking are much less viable as alternatives to car travel. Many of these students will be commuting to school by car, occupying local street parking and adding to the traffic burden that causes regular jams on our arterials. Refusing to densify is counterproductive to traffic concerns. Next, there's the idea that allowing density will harm the character of our neighborhoods or reduce the sense of community enjoyed by current residents. For myself, I can say that I've lived in the South End for more than 10 years. In that time, I've seen the housing shortage push friends of mine, members of my community, out of the neighborhood and off the peninsula. From my perspective, refusing to allow ample housing already comes at the cost of community. Even if you disagree with that idea, there's a real material harm that comes to the community when the hospitals, for example, struggle to find staff because there's no available housing nearby for them to live in. The new parking lot proposed to take up green space on Citadel Hill might not be necessary if fewer healthcare workers were required to drive to work. I want to also address the people who are concerned about things like shade and privacy. These are understandable concerns. Everyone likes those things. However, these people are not entitled to dictate what their neighbors do with their property. This is a compromise that is part of what it means to live in a city and enjoy the benefits of highly developed infrastructure, nearby culture, and amenities. The idea that these concerns should be put above the needs of the city, especially in the urban core of all places, is absurd and irresponsible. Lastly, it's worth mentioning the claim championed by those in favor of amending the reforms, that even with the amendments, the reforms will allow for up to 200,000 new units to be built. We saw earlier that 135,000 of those units are predicated on the claim that basically every suburban home will be redeveloped up to 4 or 6 or 8 units, whatever you end up allowing. No one is going to be forced to sell or redevelop their property. Change, even with unamended reforms, will come at a relatively slow pace. Will our citizens in the future be happy with the choices we're making now? They can't really be here to speak today, but we still have a responsibility to take their needs into account.
I am here today to urge our councillors to meet the conditions laid out by the Housing Accelerator Fund and thereby gain access to millions in much-needed infrastructure funding. Halifax is rapidly growing as a city, but to the surprise of no one here, not enough housing has been built to shelter the thousands of new residents that arrive each year. For the past 20 years, Halifax housing prices have slowly swelled to unsustainable levels and, within the past few, have ballooned to a genuine crisis point. I want to emphasize that this crisis is not something that just happened to us. It is not a natural disaster or another global financial episode. We are not victims to forces beyond our control. We are at a crisis point because we have chosen to be there. There is a housing shortage in Halifax because, at every point leading up to it, our elected representatives have refused to act sufficiently in order to stem it. We are in a housing crisis now because the city chose not to respond to our burgeoning population in 2016 and 17. We are discussing these reforms today because when council did finally choose to act with the centre plan, it was minute and laughably insufficient. We are in a housing crisis because just last year, this very council rejected a 2-story apartment in Fall River because it might lead to a minor traffic increase on one of the nearby roads. A conclusion, I might add, that was not supported by either of the traffic studies or a decade worth of development proposals. I do not say these things to relitigate the past, but to highlight the consequences of choosing inaction. Halifax will continue to grow, and if we refuse to build homes, we will suffer more of those consequences. In this case, one of those consequences will be rejecting millions of dollars that could be used to revitalize our anemic infrastructure while other cities speed ahead. Inaction is as much a deliberate choice as action. If this proposal is rejected, we are choosing to keep home ownership out of reach for a generation, a glut of black market lodging houses, and more homelessness. 4 units and 4 stories is a reasonable proposal. It is also the bare minimum. It is something that frankly should have been on the table in 2016, and not something that the city needs to be bribed into at the peak of our housing woes. Housing is not a luxury, but a basic human need. A failure to supply it, or a failure to even let private developers supply it, is akin to a failure to supply water, food, or sanitation.
I hope that Council will vote in favor of this motion. As we have seen, some of today's speakers suggest that the proposed reforms are too much, too fast. But to most renters and young people of ordinary means, the urgency to act has been clear for years now. The housing crisis has transformed Halifax into one of the most exclusive cities in Canada. These reforms are overdue. The housing shortage has been for some years a dominating source of stress, frustration, hopelessness, and worse. I grew up in Halifax and attempted in the past to buy a home here, but I've been priced out. Many people who would benefit from these proposed reforms are not here with us today. For one, they were probably working this afternoon to pay rent. Most young people can't attend a hearing in the middle of a weekday. Secondly, participation in this conversation demands of the layperson an understanding of housing economics and municipal planning. On the other hand, it's easy to mobilize people to fight the prospect of change in the neighborhood, especially when that change might be apartments in neighborhoods that were traditionally composed of single-family homes. For longtime residents of established neighborhoods, the status quo may seem to be the natural order of things. However, it is sustained by an invisible and artificial system we call land use planning. Planning is not an inherently neutral undertaking. It reflects our values and it aims to achieve particular goals. What are we trying to achieve? Do these systems make Halifax more just, more inclusive, and more livable for all? Or do they serve particular groups at the expense of others? We all know the story of Africville. The injustice that took place at Africville was facilitated in part by the veneer of supposed objectivity, neutrality, and rationality that planning provided. I used to live in a 9-unit apartment building. Why do we effectively outlaw that in most of the city? I've lived in Tokyo and Hong Kong in proximity to buildings of all sizes. It was fine. Banning them is exclusionary and classist. Is that the kind of city we want to build? Halifax has a shockingly low vacancy rate of 1%. New buildings are fully occupied. There is intense competition for vacant units, which hurts all renters and has brought about an unprecedented homelessness crisis. We need to build more housing of all types. We need an end to arbitrary restrictions that constrain housing supply, drive up prices, and exacerbate inequality.
My family and I hail from Cape Breton Island. I grew up thinking that Halifax was the big city. only to move here and find out that many of the people that live here are rooted in a culture of resisting growth and development. Halifax to us is a place of opportunity, and Halifax holds a very special place in my heart, and I hope those who take the big leap to move to our amazing city, whether you're a student or a new immigrant, or someone looking for a fresh start and to kick our city like ours, that you can afford a roof over your head, and that you can afford to take good transit, and that you can afford to raise a family here. And I'm here today in hope of changing this culture against growth. The intervention is not just about buildings, but it's about people, communities, and the future of Halifax. I think about my community on Elm Street, just in the downtown near Quinpool Road, a street well maintained and cared for by the residents. Around my street, I see housing that wouldn't be legal today. We need to legalize more housing in this city, and I can't think of a better time to do that than right now. The proposed changes to the bylaws under the Housing Accelerator Fund are a crucial step in addressing the severe housing shortage that we face. This change will not only provide much needed housing, but also support for the economic growth and vibrancy of our neighborhoods and our people. People fear that allowing more units per lot will lead to overcrowding and disrupt the community feel. However, the proposed bylaw changes include thoughtful measures to address these concerns. For example, the amendments will ensure that developments respect existing heritage conservation areas around the city and consider water supply and wastewater capacity. Additionally, reducing parking requirements for multi-unit dwellings to 1 parking per 3 units encourages the use of public transit in our most urban areas. And that can definitely help us in our congestion. And I hope today that you folks vote in support of these things, so that way we can make our city a better place for growing families and people like me who want to have kids but can't afford it.
I'm speaking here today in complete support of the proposed changes to zoning underneath the Housing Accelerator Fund proposal. This, previously sleepy city with only modest growth had an uptick in the early 2010s, leading to opportunity for myself and my friends to be able to continue living here. We stayed with plans to build our future lives here, move out of our parents' home, start relationships, build those careers, buy homes, and start families. For the most part, things went according to plan, and then COVID hit, and Halifax's trajectory, I believe, changed forever. The homes that we thought were within reach jumped in price so quickly it made our heads spin. I have friends who have offered on countless houses before they were successful or have not even been successful yet. It's a very difficult thing, making what would be the largest financial decision of your life and getting turned down on that 20+ times. Let alone other friends who are not at the stage of their life to be able to afford a home and find their rents quickly skyrocketing, and even the ability for them to move is hampered due to the fact that if they were moved, their rents would go up significantly to the market rate that they'd be finding themselves in otherwise. And let me be clear, I'm speaking of myself and my friends who are incredibly privileged. We have post-secondary degrees, work in professional careers, and have had financial support from our families. Silver spoon and all, we are just barely managing this housing crisis. Those not with the same luck as us are getting hurt. Both the financial and mental toll would be constantly draining. This is a problem that is so strongly affecting our lives that it is a constant topic of conversation. This is kind of what we're talking about these days, and I thought it'd be other things, but this is what we're finding ourselves focused on. And it's unfortunate because the problem in essence is relatively simple. We built a great city and people want to move here because they were forced out of cities that are too expensive for them to live in otherwise. And we are operating with the thinnest supply of housing, paying for the cost of sprawl and losing our sense of community as we stretch out into new suburbs in the woods. It'll end up like Toronto, where any small development is contended against, and you end up with a sprawl of single-family suburbs next to intermittent jungles of condo towers, all while none of the housing is by any means affordable. Instead, gentle density, transit-oriented development is needed, and it's far less jarring. In fact, I'd argue that this is much more in line with maintaining the character and heart of our city. We need to ease the development process so that we can build quickly, and we need to build everywhere we can. We can only continue to build enough to maintain the affordability and ensure that nobody is forced out of the city because they can no longer afford it. I hope you move forward with the most progressive version possible of these proposed changes, and I expect you continue doing all that you can to build a Halifax that is bigger than we ever imagined, but still holds on to its sense of community.
I need housing. I don't need affordable housing. I am full-time employed. I have a great life. I'm very comfortable, but I do need housing. I would love to buy a starter home. I would love to make a living in this city and live in this city and give back to this city and have children in this city and, you know, do everything in this city that I wish I could, but I cannot because I cannot find housing. And again, that is not an affordable housing problem. That is just a housing problem. There is not enough housing. And I've been in this position as a renter. I moved to a new place in December. And I've been in this position as someone who is trying to buy a house, which is what I am right now. We need affordable housing, we need housing everywhere, all the time. And we're still basing our planning decisions on a foundation that was built in the 1940s. 1945 is when Halifax's first plan was developed. And the intent of the plan, this is the intent of the plan as written, was they wanted to preserve the desirable neighborhoods, and you can probably imagine what was desirable in 1945, and they wanted to redevelop the blighted neighborhoods, the undesirable neighborhoods. And again, you can probably imagine what was undesirable in 1945. And that is still the foundation that we're based on today. Maybe we upzoned a little bit on the edges of the desirable neighborhoods. Maybe we found some corridors and we upzoned those. But you can see today in how our city is laid out and how growth is laid out, we have still divided the city into the desirable and the undesirable. We are a growing city. You don't get to have the benefits of the growth, the additional services, the additional tax base, the nice new central library, the nice healthcare facility, the growing university, the jobs, the money, the tourism, the everything, without also having to deal with the fact that a growing city needs to grow everywhere. You know, we always get into this chicken and egg conversation. Do you do transit first? Do you do infrastructure first? Do you do housing first? What comes first? I will take either. I will take the chicken, I will take the egg, I will take literally the yolk, literally any piece, because we don't get one without the other. And so we can't just keep debating which comes first. We need to just pick one, just do something. That's everything. Thank you so much for speaking. I really encourage you and support this package moving forward. And yeah, thank you again.
So I would like to lend my support for proposed housing density across the HRM, particularly in the suburban area where I live. By building much-needed condos along the Bedford Highway and allowing 4 units as of right on all the large lots in the suburbs, we can improve our neighborhoods through densification. A larger residential base can draw in the schools, restaurants, gyms, medical clinics, and supermarkets to suburban neighborhoods that currently just sustain gas stations and drive-thrus. Our children, recent graduates, and aging parents will benefit from the density most of all. We can build a practical multi-generational homes and backyard suites, or our loved ones can find accommodations in a complete neighborhood of their choosing. By inviting people into existing neighborhoods, we may also be able to prevent the construction of new subdivisions and the type of sprawl that leads to more traffic, more city debt, and less green space. So yes, I'm optimistic about the housing accelerator in the suburban area. However, as we improve our neighborhoods through density, let's ensure that we improve our public and active transit. I'm heartened by the funded Mill Cove Ferry Terminal and the proposed rapid transit strategy, but what of the active transportation promised by the Integrated Mobility Plan? The Bedford Highway Functional Plan's final report was published in May 2019. This final report outlined the necessity of improved infrastructure for transit, walking, and cycling along the Bedford Highway. The report included community input and proposed designs. All the city needed was the will to get the job done. Meanwhile, it's 5 years later and we don't even have sidewalks on most of the Bedford Highway between Kearney Lake Road and the proposed ferry terminal. Every day on the Bedford Highway, I see aged couples and mothers with strollers walking beside speeding cars, separated by nothing more than paint on the ground. And with the proposed Windsor Street Exchange redevelopment project, there was no plan to safely move pedestrians and cyclists between the peninsula and the Bedford Highway. Now we have a number of new condos finally being built along the Bedford Highway, the opportunity to build 4 plexes on adjacent streets, and a brand new ferry terminal hopefully on the way. And what's going to happen without active transit? New residents with means will likely buy a car if they don't have one already, adding to the traffic problem. And if they dare try to walk, run, ride a bike, or stand at a bus stop, they'll be risking injury or death as cars speed by within inches. Although I've mostly been talking about the Bedford Highway, the entire city's active transit strategy seems to prioritize the needs of cars rather than the safety of active transit users. How does that make any sense? Is any current or future elected official up for the challenge of making the HRM safe for pedestrians and cyclists? This year, I'd hate to vote for someone who will ultimately be responsible for the deaths of more active transit users. I'm excited about the densification of our neighborhoods across the HRM, but as we permit ambitious housing projects, we need to be equally as ambitious about our active transit so that we can safely move our growing population. Thank you.
I'm Jane Rideout. I'm a planning manager at Sightline Planning and Approvals. And on behalf of our clients, I submitted a letter in support of the proposed changes to the municipal planning strategies under the Housing Accelerator Fund. As a whole, we support the proposed changes to the HAF because of the increased opportunities for residential density throughout the region. The changes allow an attainable form of gentle densification across existing neighborhoods and provide the necessary intensification to major corridors that are necessary to support future transit goals. The proposed changes to parking minimums, design requirements, and building forms will make new developments economically feasible and better quality for future residents. We believe these changes align with the common planning practice and will right the historical wrongs of single-unit zoning that has previously limited residential density, particularly on the Halifax Peninsula. When developing multi-unit buildings, developers have a range of costs for amenity space, fire safety, stairways, parking, etc. The potential gain of the new units must outweigh these construction costs. That's why we urge Regional Council to consider staff's original proposal for height minimums in the Housing Accelerator zoned properties. These arterials are areas where densification should be supported, so new greenfield development can be avoided, and municipal services are used to their maximum efficiency, all of which contribute to more walkable, complete, and connected communities. Thank you for your consideration. We appreciate the work that municipal staff have done to compile these changes, make adjustments, and adapt to Halifax's growing population. We look forward to their continued collaboration with municipal staff on future planning processes, including the suburban plan review and the regional plan review.
We've heard a lot about what's going to happen to our single-family communities, or our single-family houses in our communities. I wasn't going to talk about this, but the more I heard people speak, I felt it was necessary. I live in Halifax on the peninsula. I'm very lucky. Got in early through a series of decisions I made to share mortgages and debt with family members. My brother and I bought a set of flats, fixed it up, did all that, and we got very lucky. But what I have now and what I'm able to do is live in a community where I can walk to work or bike to work. My kids go to school across the street from my house, and I see the community that we've built in Halifax over the last decade. I've got 3 daughters, they're 13, 11, and 7, and they go to birthday parties in apartment buildings that were built in the last 5 years. Those kids that live in those apartment buildings babysit my other kids. Community exists in these buildings. It's not a myth. It's not a theory. It's existing in our city today. It's vibrant, it's active, and it's introducing my children to a different Halifax than some of us who may have grew up here knew. And it's a different Halifax that I think we should all be very proud of. But the character of my neighborhood is not defined by the size of my building or even the architecture of the buildings. It's defined by the people who live in them. I also have the opportunity to volunteer on my local, or on my school's home and school committee. I chair that for a local junior high, and we know now what these kids are bringing with different lived experience. No, they don't all live in single family homes, but when is that a criteria for being a member of community? When is that a criteria for lifting up your neighbors and doing things that make our city better? It's happening in apartment buildings right now. I'm living the experience of it with my own family, and I'm seeing it in the families who rent from us in our buildings across HRM. So at all stages of life, you can live in a single family home, you can live in a tiny home, you can live in an apartment building, and you are a valuable member of our community, and we don't want to have any sort of conversation that people who live in different tenure of housing have any different contribution to our community. So just wanted to make that point. Adopt the changes that are on the plate. They make a difference for our city. They allow us to grow. Thank you, Simon. And I think you're going to see an amazing Halifax that will be just as brilliant as it has been for the last several hundred years into hundreds of years into the future with these changes. So thank you.
No, sir. Thank you. And thank most of those people for going who are involved in More Homes Halifax, and for the minority of people who were there who were not involved in More Homes Halifax to some degree, thank you too. Thank everybody who goes to these things and advocates that more homes be built so we may stop this artificial blockade on our basic needs that the city has been putting onto us for decades upon decades now. And yes, there will be a video that I will be releasing highlighting the opposite positions here as well. Trust me, you can look out for that in the next week. If you'd like to involve yourself with More Homes Halifax, you can follow us on Twitter at More Homes Halifax. You can openly message the page even if we don't follow you or you don't follow us, and be requested to be added to our group chat if you support everything that you just heard in this video today. Thank you.